talk about the new iPhone real quick. It's got 10-bit, it's got ProRes, it's got cinematic mode, it's got all these tools that make it super easy to get professional looking footage right out of the camera. And that's all well and good. But I think with the right tools and the right techniques, we could get footage from an Android phone to look just as good. So, you know, let's do that. So here's what I want to do. I want to put together a little sequence. It's all going to be shot here in the studio, which there isn't much space. Most of this stuff is going to be located here on this shelf, but I'm going to put together a little bit of a sequence, a little bit of a story. Not too long, maybe 30 seconds or so, but the goal is to make it look professional, make it look like it was shot with an actual camera. And by the way, that's not easy to do with a phone. There's some obstacles that we have to deal with. Let's talk about those real quick. I mean, first of all, you're shooting an 8-bit Rec 709 footage, which doesn't give you a lot of room to work with in post. And phones are really, really tiny, which means they're super lightweight and they're hard to hold steady, which means you gotta use a tripod, you gotta use a gimbal, or you gotta be really, really good at holding your hands steady, which that's not me. And then if that wasn't bad enough, you've got these tiny little sensors. I mean, sensors in phones are getting better and they're getting a little bit bigger, but they're still super, super tiny compared to an actual camera, which means we're gonna have some exposure issues. We're gonna have some dynamic range issues that we have to overcome. So first things first, what about the stock camera app? Is that going to be of any use to us? And the answer to that is probably not, because stock camera apps do weird things to footage. I mean, most phone footage, it looks like it was shot on a phone, right? It's over sharpened. The motion blur is weird if you get any at all, because the shutter speed is just being adjusted depending on what exposure you need. Speaking of exposure, you get exposure shifts. If you go from low light to regular light, you get white balance shifts. If you move the camera to a spot where you need a different white balance, it's all over the place. I mean, it's good quality for a phone, but it's not good for professional use. So we're going to be using Filmic Pro for this sequence because, well, one, they're the sponsor of this video, and two, because they give you access to all of the manual settings in your camera, all of the advanced settings. Plus, they give you a whole bunch of other tools that are really gonna help us out in our little experiment here. But the app's only part of the issue. Let's take a look at some of the other gear that we might want to use. We've already talked about using a tripod or a gimbal for the whole stability thing. Now, I don't have a gimbal, so we'll be doing the whole tripod thing. But another thing we need to think about is exposure and dynamic range. We need to maximize that as much as possible because, like I said before, we're not gonna have a lot of room to work with in post. So in here in the studio, that comes down to lighting. Now I've got some nice studio lights in here. I've got my Nanlite Pavo tubes. I've got my little, I don't remember the name of it, my little flexible LED light thing that I use as a key light. I've got some good stuff. I've got my Aperture ALMX, but if you don't have that, you still have some options. For example, I've got this tiny little cube light thing from Rode. It came with their like little mobile vlogging kit that I just picked up on a whim. It's pretty cool. It's super bright. It's got these little colored gels that you can put on top of it. It charges via USB-C. It's pretty cool. I'll link the whole mobile vlogging kit down below. Actually, it comes with a microphone, which is actually really, really good quality. It also comes with a little handheld tripod and a phone clip that has a cold shoe mount, so you can put this thing on top of it. It's very, very handy. But if you don't have studio lights, you don't have a little light that you can put on top of your phone, then you have your flashlight on your phone. And Filmic Pro actually gives you the ability to turn on the flashlight, which is super cool. Now, word of warning, you film with this thing and you're liable to get some pretty nasty shadows. So you'll have to keep that in mind, but it'll work in a pinch. So that pretty much takes care of all the equipment that we're gonna need. We're gonna need some way to hold the phone steady. We're gonna need good lighting so we can get proper exposure right in camera. Now let's talk about what we actually need to do in the camera so we have a good looking shot. Now, setting up Filmic Pro, same basic rules apply as if you're setting up a regular camera. You want to choose your resolution and your frame rate, which can all be done from settings. So I've got it set up Let's go into resolution. I'm shooting at 4K 2160p 8-bit SDR because that's all I've got. Filmic Ultra is the bit depth, so you can do Ultra all the way down to economy. I like having as much flexibility as I can get in post, and I want it to be as high quality as possible. So we do Filmic Ultra. Video codec, I shoot in HEVC, which is H.265. It's more compressed, but it's got higher quality than H.264. And I've got a computer that's powerful enough to work with HEVC footage. So if you can do it, do that. If not, H.264 will work just fine. I've also chosen my aspect ratio here. I'm gonna shoot in 2.39 to 1, but instead of actually having it crop in the phone, I've turned crop source to overlay off. So basically it just makes it so my grid is acting as a guide for that crop, so I can make sure everything's in frame, but I still have room to reframe in post if I need to. There's a whole bunch of settings here. You got audio, you got device settings, super important. Scroll all the way down here. I like keeping noise reduction on and put it to the highest quality that you can get. And then I take sharpness and I turn that off because I don't want any sharpening baked into my image. If I need sharpening, I'll put it in post. I do not want it in my original image. So we'll keep that there. So that takes care of all the settings that we need to work with here. Let's go ahead and choose how our image is gonna look. Let's go over to our color profiles. First, we're gonna go with white balance. Let's go ahead and turn on auto white balance. If it's blue, it's an auto white balance. We're gonna go ahead and frame up a shot here, let auto white balance do its thing, and then we're just gonna tap it again and it's gonna lock that white balance in. So if I start moving around, I'm not gonna get any white balance shifts, which is perfect. Now for color profiles, you've got a whole bunch of different options. First, you've got your cinema kit profiles here, which is a bunch of different curves. You've got your native curve here, which is like basically what your stock camera app puts out. You've got natural, you've got dynamic, and then you've got flat and log V2. And log V2 is actually Filmic Pro's log profile that is built specifically for 8-bit footage out of the phone. And as a bonus, if you go to Filmic's website, which is linked below, you can actually get the conversion LUTs for the flat and the log V2 profiles completely for free. So that's kind of awesome. So filming in flat or log V2 is going to give you more dynamic range and more room to work with in post. But if you don't want to deal with that, if you don't want to deal with color grading, especially on phone footage, I completely understand. Filmic Pro just released these new film profiles, which look super, super cool. They're in-app purchases, and I actually paid for them with my own money. So, but they're really, really cool. And you've got a few different packages here. So you've got Adamant, inspired by the modern blockbuster. You've got Charcoal, which is inspired by mid-century black and white. You've got Novus, which is inspired by modern cinematic greats. And then you've got Infrared, which is inspired by infrared celluloid. Now, my personal favorite is Novus. And if I come in here, I love this Delphi look. So we're gonna stick with that. And there we go. Next thing we need to do is set up our shutter speed and our ISO. So let's go ahead and do that. We're gonna do shutter speed first. We're gonna bring that to 1/48. Now we've got our 100-degree shutter rule, and then we're gonna lock that by tapping on it. And let's go ahead and set our ISO. Now I don't want this too high. I don't really want it going over 800 ISO because then it's gonna start looking weird. So we'll just get it down to 790. That's looking pretty good. Next thing we need to do is set our focus. We've got a focus wheel over here on the right, and you can see I've got my camera cup in focus right here. So we'll do that, and then we'll do that. And we can actually set a focus pool, which is really, really, really cool. It's just moving automatically. And you can actually control the focus pull speed. So if I turn that all the way up and I just tap this, it's just gonna go super, super fast. So we've got resolution, we've got frame rate, we've got our shutter speed, we've got our ISO, we've got our focus. We are ready to film. So here's what I came up with. that was not as easy as I thought it would be. Here's the deal. Remember how I said that phones are super, super tiny and lightweight, and so you need either a gimbal or a tripod in order to keep the phone steady? Well, I quickly found out when I went to go edit my first attempt at this sequence that just tapping the phone to trigger a focus pull is gonna give you pretty bad camera shake. So I ended up having to reshoot the whole thing using Filmic Remote, which is an amazing companion app to Filmic Pro, and it allows you to actually control Filmic Pro from a secondary device. So I downloaded it, put it on my tablet, and I was able to trigger my focus pulls, start and stop recording, even change my exposure and my white balance all from the tablet without ever having to touch the phone, which is also how I was able to set up my tripod behind my desk and get those shots of me and have it just be good to go. I didn't have to like try and guess the focus over there and then come back over here. I could just do it all from Filmic Remote. It was great. But that also meant that all of the shots that I did were 100% static. There was absolutely no movement done in camera. All of that was done in post. And speaking of post, let's talk about how I edited this thing. Once I got all of my shots into the timeline and assembled the way that I wanted it to be, I used keyframes in order to create motion. I did my pans, I did my zooms, everything that you saw, any kind of motion was all done with keyframes. I even added a camera shake effect to a couple of the clips to make it look a little bit more natural and a little bit more handheld. And after that, I went into color grading. And since I got everything right in camera as far as exposure and white balance were concerned, and because I used one of those built-in film looks from Filmic Pro, I didn't actually have to do a whole lot. I did a film print emulation because I just love that film contrast look. I added a little bit of grain and I topped it off with the classic M31 LUT, dropped down to 20% or so because it just looked really, really good combined with that look that I got from Filmic Pro. So final verdict, can you get professional looking footage out of an Android phone? This was my first attempt at it and I think we did pretty good. With a little bit more practice, I think it could get even better. So my answer is yes, you just need to take the time to get everything right in camera. And an app like Filmic Pro is going to go a long way in helping you do that because it's going to give you all of the settings you need, all of the tools that you need in camera in order to get the look that you want. So yeah, you can get professional looking footage without the 10-bit, without the ProRes. That stuff helps, but you don't need it. The Lab is a brand new series on my channel where I do experiments like these in order to answer questions and improve skills and all of that stuff. So if there's a question that you have about filmmaking, something that you're wondering if it's even possible to do, let me know in the comments and I'll put it on the list. Thanks so much to Filmic Pro for sponsoring this video. You guys are awesome. So I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe.